Yes, that is to include the case for the opposition.
Well, I felt like the proposition lost when they said they had something in common with Daniel Lonsdale or the student union. But anyway, they continuously talk about expanding the curriculum, okay? But when people talk about decolonising something, they claim it broadens the curriculum. And they claim it's about teaching history from a broader perspective, as each of them have said. This is a noble idea, but it's just that, an idea. One open to being exploited for ideological purposes which they continuously have been ignoring. For in practice, when we talk about decolonising the curriculum, what do we mean? Well, this involves the whole historical narrative of the way things are taught. In a manner which obscures the past, both its villains and heroes. Take for example, a way we are taught about our very own institutions, like Cambridge. Recently, the university set up an investigation called the Legacies of Enslavement Advisory Group. Now, I read Lawrence's essay on this, and I found it very good in my argument. But this involves exploring the university's colonial ties. Whilst, regrettably, there were individuals from the University of Cambridge who were educated there, who partook in the slave trade, the report itself admitted that there was no direct link of a slave plantation or enslaved people being linked to Cambridge. Instead, the article relies on guilt by association, because it cannot actually directly link ownership of the institution of Cambridge to slavery. And this is a result of the decolonisation narrative. And yet, whilst there is a plethora of articles which criticise the roles of these previous graduates in the slave trade, there's relatively little reported, and even more which is hidden, of the noble graduates who tirelessly campaigned against it, which is quite ironic that the first speaker of the proposition said that decolonising the curriculum would highlight more of these people. Because when they have actually tried that, that didn't actually take place. So, I mean, you don't hear about Henry Colthurst or Thomas Clarkson and their efforts at campaigning against it. In fact, Clarkson was actually criticised by the group for being too elitist and too gradualist. So you see how they obscure our heroes of the past.
Where do you hear the name?
Thomas Clarkson. A second thing we ought to consider when we address this motion is why are we taught these things? Well, primarily for a subject like history, I'm going to focus on history as a historian, we are taught this by objective fact, and we
Take point in the meanwhile?
Yeah,
Until the works of Sir Syed Ahmed Khan are normalized, Aligarh University will never get its rightful reputation back. Any academic from that institution is secondary to the academics from Oxford. Why do you have epistemic equality? Why do you fight for the false consciousness and mental colonization? Engage with the case as I gave it.
Well, no, but you also there's a lot of waffle and not a lot of substance. We have been continuously talking about learning more niche aspects of history. Stuff maybe about the farming, the second proposition the speaker brought up, about how it was developed in Africa and so on. But the thing is, what we are taught primarily in history, which might be seen as a colonial impact, is because primarily the countries which are colonial countries, like Britain, France, Germany, America to an extent with its neo-colonial empire, they have the most impact on our modern world and the modern world we live in.
No comments.
Because of that reason. And that is why we are taught those countries. So this idea that we should change our curriculum to include the mainstay of smaller countries, maybe like Lebanon or Ireland, although they may have rich national history, the fact is they're not very relevant in the modern formation of our global history and our current politics.
No comments.
You can learn.
Yeah, it is relevant.
Yeah, it's not a lot. Anyway, no, because like, look at the Industrial Revolution though. Realistically, what had a bigger impact? The Industrial Revolution in our current modern society, or farming, which was developed 5,000 years ago. I mean, now, thirdly, we must consider what is the actual purpose of this motion. What does it actually serve? Is it to help us understand our own history to a greater extent, or is it a merely self-flagellating act of making us ashamed of our history? Something I understand why the honourable gentleman of the proposition may feel entitled to do so, because of that shameful break. Anyway, the point being, I struggle to see what this proposition actually aims to achieve from this motion. This is a free country. If you so desire to study your more niche aspects of history, then you can do so. You have the ability to do so. There are plenty of modules which are already open to you. This movement of decolonisation is frankly unnecessary. Academia does not stop you from what we learn. I know for sure when it comes to my own studies, I'm spoiled for choice of the different views when it comes to issues of empire and roles of the European powers within the world. So, to sum up our argument and our rebuttals to the proposition, what are they actually saying? Well, they're saying, okay, decolonisation is an expansion of the curriculum. Our curriculum simply does not have the space to include less relevant things towards global narrative. Frankly, it's the norm across the world that you are taught primarily your own history or the history of your histories of other countries which have significantly impacted your own country. A second point is there are harmful consequences for this motion. For this is fundamentally an ideological movement. And as we've seen in history, whenever ideologies try and go into the objective study of certain topics, it always leads to ill. It always leads to stifled intellectual growth. It leads to reduced academic debate. It leads to reduction in freedom of thought. And it frankly leads to self-censorship, as we have seen in recent topics like Israel-Palestine. Frankly, if you just include all of these different manners of debate, you're self-censoring yourself, and it's a Pandora's box which could lead us onto the dark road of American polarization. And I'm sure none of us would like to be like the Americans. And thirdly, how are we actually going to implement this? Like, the opposition keeps talking about, okay, we're going to expand these things, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. But it's not a tangible motion, okay? You already have the opportunity to learn other aspects of history. But if you're trying to decolonize, say, something like the national curriculum, you can't. Just because things like history is such a broad topic, how are you going to include new things when there's already 1,000 years of English history which you have to study? It's frankly impossible to include the history of this country over there just because my granddad's from there, or the history of this country over there just because my friend's cousin's there. You can't. You can do that at higher education, and that is a wonderful thing about the country we live in, that our academics at universities like Durham, like Oxford, like Cambridge, you have so many options for these things. Yeah, go on.
I was supporting what you're saying, because the debate is about university level. Your arguments are self-defeating. You can study at your own time. You can study your own models at your own time. Your arguments are cyclical. Engage with the case as we give.
I disagree, because a proposition, by fundamentally being a proposition, you're proposing a change to something, correct?
Yeah.
So what are you proposing to change right now? You already have the option to learn these different perspectives of history. You do. And there's nothing which is stopping you from learning about this. There's nothing which is stopping you from learning about your own biases, comparing historians. Our marking theories for stuff like the humanities subjects addresses these things. They address these contexts. They address biases which are present within them. There is not because of decolonisation, because it's a fundamentally responsibility of any academic field, regardless of political leanings, to look at your sources, check the biases behind those sources, see how that impacts the discourse, and so on. So, why are we rejecting this motion? They are talking about an expansion of the field. But what are they expanding to? There is nothing tangible offered by them. There is a lot of emotions, there is a lot of weird analogies, but there is nothing actually tangible to understand. On the other hand, we, our great country, okay, fine. To sum up, it's impossible. What they're asking for is already granted, so there's no need to decolonise the curriculum. It's merely an ideological tool to impact and stifle academic debate.